You won't believe how the lawmaker handled this shocking confrontation. Jasmine Crockett, on the right side, startled as a man throws up white supremacist hand signs outside her office during a congressional workday. What happened next wasn't just about one protester. It exposed a sitting congressman's silence when hate came knocking, and revealed exactly who stands up when standing up isn't politically convenient. Before we dive into the confrontation that had Capitol Police scrambling and one congressman desperately trying to change the subject, hit that subscribe button, because this story involves constitutional boundaries, political courage, and the moment when silence becomes complicity. The Cannon House office building is one of those places where American democracy happens in the spaces between official business. Congressional offices line identical corridors. Staffers rush between meetings carrying briefing books and coffee. Tourists occasionally wander through on guided tours. And the whole place has this weird mix of historical gravitas and bureaucratic mundaneness. It's the kind of environment where everyone's supposed to be professional, where conflicts get resolved through procedural mechanisms, where even intense disagreements get filtered through the polite language of parliamentary procedure. Which is why what happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October felt so jarring, so out of place, so fundamentally wrong. Jasmine Crockett was between committee sessions, walking back to her office with two staffers to prepare for an afternoon vote series, when she noticed something that made her stop mid-stride. Standing approximately 15 feet from her office entrance was a man, white, probably mid-40s, wearing a tactical vest over a black t-shirt and holding a sign that read "Defend America First." That alone wouldn't have been particularly unusual. The Capitol complex sees protesters regularly, people exercising their First Amendment rights to petition their government, make their voices heard, express their political views. But this man wasn't just holding a sign. As Crockett and her staffers approached, he made deliberate eye contact with her and then slowly, unmistakably, flashed what advocates recognize as white supremacist hand signals. Not once, but repeatedly, while maintaining that eye contact, while making sure she saw, while ensuring there was no ambiguity about what he was communicating. His expression was cold, calculated, designed to intimidate. One of Crockett's staffers immediately moved closer to her, instinctively protective. The other pulled out their phone, starting to record. Crockett's first instinct was what most people's would be: shock, then fear, then a rapid mental calculation about whether this situation was about to escalate into physical danger. But then something else kicked in, the trial lawyer training that had served her well before she came to Congress. Don't show fear. Don't give him what he wants. And definitely don't let him think he can intimidate a member of Congress in her own office hallway. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, "you need to leave this area immediately. You're creating a threatening environment for staff and members." The man smiled, a predatory expression that made the situation feel even more dangerous. "I have a First Amendment right to be here," he said, his voice carrying that fake reasonable tone that extremists often adopt when they're trying to provoke a response while maintaining plausible deniability. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just expressing my political views." Before Crockett could respond, a door down the hallway opened and Congressman Cory Mills stepped out. Mills, the Florida Republican who built his post-military career on aggressive conservatism and culture war positioning, took in the scene quickly. For just a moment, Crockett thought he might actually help defuse the situation, a fellow member of Congress, recognizing a clear security threat and acting appropriately. That hope died in the next 5 seconds. "Representative Crockett," Mills said, walking toward them with that casual confidence of someone who thinks they're about to score political points. "Is there a problem here? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're harassing a constituent who's exercising his constitutional rights." The audacity of the statement actually made Crockett's jaw drop slightly. Mills was looking at a man who just flashed white supremacist signals at a black congresswoman and was characterizing the situation as her harassing him. It was such a complete inversion of reality that for a moment she couldn't even formulate a response. Her staffer jumped in first. "Congressman Mills, this man was making threatening gestures." "I saw a man holding a sign," Mills interrupted smoothly. "Last I checked, that's protected political speech. Unless you're suggesting that Democrats now want to criminalize political expression they disagree with?" Crockett found her voice, and when she spoke, there was steel underneath. Congressman, that man just flashed white supremacist hand signals at me. Repeatedly, that's not political expression. That's intimidation. And the fact that you're defending it tells me everything I need to know about where you stand. Mills actually laughed in a way that was clearly performative, clearly designed to make Crockett seem like she was overreacting. Oh, come on. White supremacist hand signals. You're really going there. Look, I get that you've built your brand on calling everything racist, but maybe sometimes a person is just holding their hand a certain way. Not everything is a hate crime. Representative. The protester was still standing there, now looking pleased that he had a congressional defender, still occasionally flashing those same signals while Mills provided cover. Crockett could feel her staffers getting more agitated, could see other congressional aides stopping in the hallway, uncertain whether to intervene or keep walking. This situation was escalating, and Mills was actively making it worse. You know what's fascinating to me, Congressman Mills? Crockett said, and her tone had shifted now from defensive to prosecutorial. You're very concerned about this man's First Amendment rights. Very concerned about making sure he can stand outside my office and make threatening gestures without consequences. But you were completely silent when actual violence happened on January 6th. You were completely silent when your supporters were calling for people to be hanged. You were completely silent when swastikas and nooses started showing up at protests. So forgive me if I don't think your sudden passion for free speech protection is actually about principles. Mills's expression tightened. He clearly hadn't expected Crockett to go on offense. That's completely different. How is it different? Crockett pressed. Because the people being threatened are black and brown? Because the symbols are associated with white supremacy? Help me understand, Congressman. When hate speech becomes something you feel compelled to defend, versus something you conveniently ignore. By now, several other people had gathered in the hallway. A Capitol police officer had arrived, clearly trying to assess the situation and determine whether intervention was necessary. The protester, sensing that things weren't going entirely his way anymore, despite Mills's defense, had stopped making the hand signals and was trying to look innocent and peaceful. But Crockett's staffer had the video, had captured the whole thing, and that evidence wasn't going away. Mills tried to pivot, going for a different angle of attack. Look, Representative Crockett, I think emotions are running high here. Don't patronize me, Crockett cut him off sharply. Emotions aren't running high. Adrenaline is running high because I just had a white supremacist deliberately intimidate me outside my office while you watched and defended him. So let's be very clear about what's happening here. You're actively choosing, to provide cover for someone who's engaging in behavior that any reasonable person would recognize as threatening. And you're doing it because you think there's political benefit in it. She took a step closer to Mills, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. Let me tell you what this looks like from where I'm standing, Congressman. This looks like a sitting member of Congress who's so invested in culture war positioning that he'll defend actual white supremacist behavior when it's directed at a colleague. This looks like someone who's decided that protecting his political brand is more important than basic decency or the safety of other members. And you know what? That's a choice you're making. Own it. Mills tried one more deflection. I think you're making a lot of assumptions. Crockett pulled out her phone and pulled up something she'd been saving for exactly this kind of moment. Let's talk about assumptions, Congressman. Let's talk about your recent court case. The one involving the restraining order. The one where you had to explain certain behaviors that, from the court documents, sound a whole lot like intimidation. You want to talk about threatening behavior? Because I've read the filings, and they paint a pretty interesting picture of how you handle conflict when you think nobody's watching. The hallway got very quiet. Mills's face had gone pale and then red. The mention of his court case, which had been covered in local Florida media but hadn't gotten much national attention, was clearly not something he'd expected to come up in this confrontation. Several of the staffers who'd been watching the exchange looked shocked, clearly not having known about Mills's legal issues. That case was dismissed, Mills said, his voice tight. Was it dismissed, or did you settle to make it go away? Crockett asked, because the court records I saw suggested it was the latter. And you know what's interesting about that? Someone with a documented pattern of behavior that others found threatening is now standing here defending a white supremacist who's engaging in threatening behavior toward a black congresswoman. That's not a coincidence, Congressman. That's a pattern. The Capitol Police officer had clearly decided that this situation needed de-escalation and asked the protester to move along, citing rules about maintaining clear hallways in congressional office buildings. The man tried to argue, looked to Mills for backup, but Mills, now thoroughly on the defensive about his own issues, wasn't providing it anymore. The protester reluctantly gathered his sign and started walking toward the exit, throwing one last threatening look at Crockett as he went. But Crockett wasn't done with Mills. You know what the really sad part is? You could have been helpful. When you saw someone harassing a colleague, you could have said, "Hey, that's not acceptable. You need to leave." You could have recognized that allowing white supremacist behavior in the Capitol complex is dangerous for all of us. But instead, you saw a political opportunity. You saw a chance to defend someone your base would approve of defending, even though what he was doing was clearly wrong. And that's what's broken about our politics right now. The complete unwillingness to call out wrong behavior when it's coming from your side. Mills, recognizing he'd lost this confrontation badly, tried to retreat with whatever dignity he could salvage. I think we can all agree that tensions are high and maybe we should take a step back. No, Congressman, we don't all agree, Crockett interrupted. What we should agree on is that white supremacist intimidation has no place in the halls of Congress. What we should agree on is that when someone is clearly trying to threaten and intimidate a member, other members should stand against that regardless of party. But you didn't do that. And every staffer, every member, every person watching this interaction now knows that when it came time to stand up against hate or score political points, you chose the points. Mills walked away without responding, retreating to his office while staffers and other onlookers processed what they'd just witnessed. The Capitol Police officer remained to take Crockett's statement and get the video evidence her staffer had recorded. And Crockett, still shaking slightly from adrenaline, but maintaining her composure, went into her office to decompose and figure out next steps. Within an hour, the video had leaked. Whether from one of the staffers present or someone else who'd recorded the confrontation, it didn't matter. The footage showed everything. The protester making white supremacist hand signals, Mills defending him, Crockett confronting both of them, and Mills's eventual retreat after she brought up his court case. It was dramatic, it was clear, and it was politically explosive. Conservative media tried to spin it as Crockett attacking a constituent and harassing Mills with baseless allegations about his legal issues. But the video made it hard to sell that narrative. The threatening behavior was obvious. Mills's defense of it was indefensible. And Crockett's response looked like exactly what it was, a member of Congress refusing to be intimidated in her own workplace. Progressive media and civil rights organizations rallied to Crockett's defense immediately. The NAACP issued a statement calling the incident a stark reminder of the threats that Black elected officials face and the complicity of those who enable such behavior. The Congressional Black Caucus held a press conference demanding better security protocols and calling out Mills by name for his role in the confrontation. Most significantly, several other members of Congress, including a few Republicans, quietly reached out to Crockett to express support and concern. They didn't do it publicly. Political realities made that difficult. But the private messages of what happened to you was wrong, and Mills should be ashamed of himself suggested that even within the Republican conference, there was recognition that Mills had crossed a line. Mills himself tried to do damage control through a statement claiming he'd been trying to de-escalate the situation and that Crockett had mischaracterized his intentions. But when pressed by reporters about whether he thought the protesters' hand signals were appropriate, he refused to condemn them, instead saying that, "I can't control how people gesture with their hands." It was a non-answer that made him look even worse. The court case that Crockett had referenced started getting renewed media attention. Investigative reporters dug into the details, finding allegations from Mills's ex-partner about aggressive behavior, financial disputes, and incidents that had led to the restraining order filing. While Mills maintained the case had been resolved, the documents painted a picture that made his defense of the Capitol protester look less like principled free speech protection and more like reflexive defense of aggressive, intimidating behavior, because it aligned with his political positioning. 3 days after the hallway confrontation, Crockett gave an interview that became one of her most widely shared statements. She spoke not just about the specific incident, but about the broader pattern she'd been warning about, the normalization of white supremacist imagery and behavior in political spaces. the unwillingness of many Republican officials to condemn it, and the cult-like dynamics that made calling out wrong behavior within conservative circles nearly impossible. "What happened outside my office wasn't isolated," she told the interviewer. "It's part of a pattern where people feel emboldened to express white supremacist views because they know they'll have political cover. They know that instead of condemnation, they'll get defenders like Cory Mills saying they're just exercising free speech. And that's dangerous, because when you normalize hate symbols, when you defend intimidation, when you refuse to draw clear lines about what's acceptable, you're creating an environment where the next incident will be worse." She continued, "And let's be honest about something else. This isn't really about free speech. Cory Mills doesn't care about protecting everyone's First Amendment rights. He cares about protecting speech that serves his political purposes. Where was his passionate defense of free speech when protesters were being arrested for peacefully demonstrating against police brutality? Where was his concern about government overreach when journalists were being threatened for covering stories Republican officials didn't like? He's selective in his principles, and that selectivity reveals what this is really about." The interviewer asked about Mills's defense, that he was trying to prevent things from escalating. Crockett laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "By defending the person engaging in threatening behavior? By accusing me of harassing someone who was deliberately trying to intimidate me? That's not de-escalation, that's taking sides." And he chose to side with someone flashing white supremacist signals over a fellow member of Congress who was being threatened. That tells you everything about his priorities. She ended the interview with a statement that became the defining quote from the entire incident. "You can flash signs outside my door, but you can't silence the truth inside that chamber. I'm not going to be intimidated. I'm not going to stop calling out hate when I see it, and I'm not going to let political cowards like Cory Mills pretend that defending white supremacist behavior is somehow principled. It's not. It's cowardice. And the American people deserve better from their elected officials." The fallout from the incident extended beyond just Crockett and Mills. The Capitol Police reviewed their security protocols and added new guidelines about identifying and responding to threatening behavior in congressional office buildings. Several members introduced resolutions condemning white supremacist symbols and behavior in the Capitol complex. Resolutions that tellingly some Republicans refused to support, claiming they were too broad or politically motivated. Mills's reputation took a significant hit, even among some conservatives who felt he'd handled the situation badly. His district in Florida started seeing increased primary challenge speculation, with potential opponents suggesting that his behavior showed poor judgment and a willingness to defend the indefensible for political gain. Whether that would translate to actual electoral consequences remained to be seen. But the political cost was real. For Jasmine Crockett, the incident reinforced both her national profile and her reputation as someone willing to confront difficult situations directly. She'd been physically intimidated, politically attacked, and publicly defended threatening behavior, and she'd